So I've done some earlier videos where I talk about the stuff that I use alongside Pandoc to make it so I can easily write my assignments in Markdown, but I haven't actually talked about the Pandoc flavor of Markdown, because if you don't know, Markdown isn't really a set standard. There's the base Markdown specification, and then there's a bunch of different flavors of Markdown which add and remove different things. So today, we're going to be talking about the Pandoc flavor of it. Now, if you've ever done something in, say, GitHub flavored Markdown, so obviously that's the Markdown used on the GitHub website, pretty much everything you're going to write in that is going to work in Pandoc. There are some slight differences with some of the more complex stuff, but for the basic usage, it works pretty much the same. And for a lot of stuff with Pandoc, it's kind of a superset of other sorts of Markdown, because what Pandoc is a document converter. So it's going to support all of these different sorts of Markdown. So if you take a Markdown document that you wrote for something completely different, it's probably also going to work in Pandoc. So the Markdown used in Pandoc is based on John Gruber's definition on the Daring Fireball website. So if you want to have a look at just the base specification for what Pandoc is using, come have a look at this. Now, what's actually being used by Pandoc is actually an extended version of this, so this isn't going to have every single thing we're going to cover today, but if you just need a basic rundown, this should be good enough. So if we go over to my second desktop, we'll see the document that we're going to be working with today. So for the rest of this video, feel free to just ignore what's going on up here. Basically, all that's doing is just setting up the document to look something like this. So we have the title and we have the author. So this doesn't really matter for today's video. If you want to know more about the metadata, then go watch my previous video on Pandoc. The first thing we're going to go over is heading. So there are two ways to do headings within Pandoc Markdown. So we have the CTEX version and the ATX version. So the ATX version is generally going to be more popular, and this is what you actually use in GitHub flavored Markdown. So we'll go over the CTEX version first. So let's just say we have a heading, and we want the heading to just be a heading. So if we just compile like this, what we're going to see is we don't actually have a heading. This is just regular text. What we have to do to make this a heading is, if we want a level 1 heading, is put 1 equals sign or as many as we want. Usually they kind of go up to the length of the text. Or if you want a second level heading, what you can do is a minus sign. So let's just do a equal sign here, and then let's do a minus sign for the second one. So we'll call this another heading. And what you're going to notice when we compile this is we have a level 1 heading, so this is numbered as 1, and we have a level 2 heading, which is numbered as 1.1, and also the text is a little bit smaller for the level 2 heading. But this is kind of an inconvenient way to do headings. The way that is generally preferred is to do them with a hash. So 1 hash is a level 1 heading, 2 hashes is a level 2 heading, 3 hashes is 3, so on and so forth. I'm pretty sure this is the stopping point though. So if we compile this now, what you're going to see is a level 1 heading, a level 2 heading, level 3, level 4, level 5. So no, level 6 isn't actually a thing. So if we get rid of this one here, recompile that, as you can see, we have all of the same headings there. And then obviously, if you were to put another level 2 heading in here, everything after this point is going to be treated as a child of that level 2 heading. So we have a look at this, and this is 1, 1.1, 1.2, and then this one isn't 1.1.1 anymore, it's now 1.2.1, and then 1.2.1.1, and so on and so forth. So moving on from that, let's go to doing dot points. So there's a couple of different ways we can do dot points. We can either do an asterisk, we can do a plus, and we can do a minus. So if we just put some junk here, we put a plus here, put some junk here, put a asterisk here, put some junk here, all of these are going to be treated as being a part of the same list. So just have a look at that, and as you can see, they are all dot points and they are all a part of the same list. So it doesn't matter if you want to mix them up or keep them as the same style, it's going to work exactly the same way. I would recommend keeping the same style, just so it's going to be easy to actually search throughout your document. Now, if you want to have these separated by paragraphs, what you can do is put a blank line between them, and if we recompile this again, what you're going to notice is there's a bit more of a space between them than there was before. So let's just remove those, and I'll just show you what I mean. So recompile that. This time they're a bit closer. The other way, they're a bit further apart. So that'll let you separate them further than they otherwise would be separated. So because we can do that loose list, which is separated by those blank lines, another cool thing we can do is actually embed block content directly within our list. So that would look a little something like this. As you can see, we have the first dot point, then we have the second dot point, and in here and right after it, we actually have some embedded block content, and this block content is indented at least up to the point where the first non-space character is. So that'll look a little something like this. And as you can see, it doesn't actually break the list. So we've got the dot point, we've got the text embedded in the dot point, then we've got the second dot point and the text embedded after that. And it doesn't actually break the formatting. So all of that is cool, but what about doing an ordered list? So let's actually do that one next. So if we do 1 dot and then give it some text, then let's say 2 dot, give it some text, 3 dot, give it some text, and we compile this. And as you're going to see, we have 1, 2, and 3. But we don't actually need to give it the numbers in this way. What we can do is just give it all 1, because the numbers don't actually matter. So if we just recompile this now, as you're going to see, the numbering doesn't actually change. The only difference the numbering will ever make is if this number is ever greater than 1. So if we set it to something like, say, 4, what it's going to do is start the numbering from 4. As you can see, 4, 5, and 6. So unless you need the numbering to start after 1, just set all of these numbers to 1 and it will work exactly the way that you would expect it to. And the next thing to talk about is doing a block quote. So a block quote is where you have a section of text. It doesn't just have to be one paragraph, it can be multiple paragraphs that is indented further than the rest of the text. So the way that works is like so. So you would start the line with a greater than sign and then put a space after that, and then everything that you start typing, this will be treated as part of the block quote. So if we go and compile this now, what you're going to notice is we have a bit of the text indented, but with just having that single bit there, you can't really tell that it's actually a block quote. Let's just add a bit of extra stuff and you'll see what I mean. So if we want to have a break between the two paragraphs, is just have a line with a greater than sign and nothing after it, and then another line with a greater than sign, and start putting some junk in here, and this will be treated as a second paragraph, and there'll be a break between them, but they will still be indented at the same level. And as you can see, that is working as so. And if instead of having this break here, you have a second line here with a greater than sign and more text on this, this is going to be treated as a part of the same paragraph as the first line. So we rerun that now, and I probably should put some real words here so you can actually see the difference. We'll just put hello world. And we recompile this, and as you can see, hello world is now being treated as a part of that paragraph. But you don't actually need to have the greater than sign on every single line. If it's a part of the same paragraph, you can actually just neglect to put it in there, and this will be still treated as being a part of the same paragraph. So we rerun this now, and as you can see, that is still a part of that paragraph, and we don't actually need the greater than sign. You do need the greater than sign there for the line breaks if you do want it to be treated as a part of the same block quote. If you don't care that it's in a different block quote, as long as it's still indented, then it's fine to just completely get rid of this one and just basically put a break between them. So we rerun this now, and as you'll see, that's still indented at the same level, but technically, this is a separate block quote from this one. So some filters might behave weirdly with that, but if you don't really care about that, then this produces basically the same effect. So with the block quotes, anything that we're covering today, so whether that be images, URLs, or even code blocks, they can be embedded within the block quotes, along with being embedded within the block content within the lists. So if you want to embed some code in that, that'll work fine. If you want to embed a URL in that, that'll all work fine as well. Now, speaking of the code, there's a couple of different ways we can go about doing this. I'm not a big fan of the first method I'm going to show you, but I will show you it anyways. So by default, everything after 4 spaces will automatically just be treated as code. So if I just write, I don't know, print hi in here, what you're going to notice is the font of this is going to change a little bit, and it looks a little bit more codey than it did before. So now it's switched over to a monospace font. I'm not sure what font it's using, but that's not really too important. Now, the other way you can go about doing this is a little bit neater, because this one doesn't actually work if you try to embed it within a block quote. The way that you would have to do that is a little bit different. So what you can do is actually wrap this in either tildes, or you can wrap it in backticks. So I'll show you this one first, and as we can see, that's produced the same effect. What you're going to notice is it's going to work exactly the same way. And as you can see, it's still showing the exact same thing. Now, there are ways to define exactly what language is being used, but I'm not going to be covering that for today. If you want to go have a look at that in the Pandoc documentation yourself, feel free to do so. There'll be a link to that down below, but I just want to show you how to actually embed code regardless of what the actual language is. So the next thing I wanted to show you is how to do links. So there's actually 2 ways to do links, and the first one I haven't actually seen in many other sorts of Markdown. So what you can do is if you wrap a link in triangle brackets, so less than and greater than, and then just stick a link in here, what it's going to do is just automatically work as a link. And it shows that I can actually go and click on this link, and that would then go and open up my web browser. Now, I don't actually remember how to click on links within Zathura, but you still get the point. It is changing my cursor, so that does mean that I can click on it. Now, the other way to do links is very similar to the way that you would embed an image. So what you do instead is you wrap the link within regular brackets, and then what you do at the start is in square brackets, you basically give a name for the link. So in this case, let's just call it Google. And what you're going to see is the text here is Google, but we can still click on it. So the reason why you'd want to do this one over the automatic links is this one actually lets you set some different alt text for the link rather than just having the link in the document. And then the way that you go and do an image is actually really, really similar. The only difference is instead of just having it set up like this, you just put an exclamation point at the start. So let's just say, we'll call this an image. And then let's set the link. We can actually set this to somewhere local. So let's just set this to /home/Brodie/pictures Stallman. Yeah, we'll do that one. And then we compile this now, and we'll see it's actually a big image. You've got this big old image of Richard Stallman in here. So that worked exactly as you'd expect it to. And because of one of the filters I have going, it also says this is a figure, and I've given it the name image, but that won't actually happen by default. Now, as you saw, this is pulling from a local image, but I'm pretty sure you can also have it pull from a website as well. Let's say that when you're writing, you want to have a bit of text emphasized. So this will either be italics or bold. And the way that you do this is actually really simple. So let's just say, my name is Brodie. And we want to have Brodie be in italics. The way you do this is, there's two ways you can do this. So you either wrap this in asterisks, or you wrap this in underscores. And what you're going to see is now this bit of text is in italics. And I'll just show you that works with underscores as well. So swap this over to underscores, and that produces the exact same result. Now, the way you do bold is also very similar. So you just do 2 layers instead of 1 layer. And what you're going to see is this bit of text is now in bold, and it also works with the asterisks as well. So swap this back over to being asterisks, and run this again. As you can see, the text is still bold. So you can either do it with underscores, or you can do it with asterisks. 1 layer is for italics, 2 layers is for bold. And then if you want to have a bit of text that has a strike through it, the way you do that is just 2 layers of tildes. So swap this over to being tildes, recompile this, and as you can see, that name now has a line through it. Now, when it comes to doing superscript and subscript text, I generally will do it through LaTeX math, but there's a way to do it directly within the Markdown as well. And the way that's done is very similar to what we did before. So let's say we wanted to have the number 2 be in superscript. The way that you do this is you just wrap 2 in caret characters. So 2 caret 2, and as you're going to see, this is going to be superscript. So now this says Brodie squared basically. And you can also then swap this over to being tildes instead of using carets, and this will be in subscript. That is now Brodie with a subscript 2 after it. And for the last bit of text manipulation, we have verbatim text. So the way that that's done is like so. Anything that you want to be verbatim text, you basically will just wrap in backticks. So if we just have a look at this now, what you'll notice is the font changes very slightly to the same font being used in the programming font. So this is just a little bit of a different way to have emphasis on a certain bit of text. So generally, you're just going to be using this for things like maths formulas or symbols that you want to have stand out from the rest of the text. Occasionally, you might need to have some sort of horizontal line separating parts of your document. And the way that's done is like so. You can do 3 asterisks, you can do 3 dashes, or you can do 3 underscores. So if we just have a look at this, what you're going to see is we have this line across here. Now, you're probably going to have to do some messing around with the formatting of the document to make sure this actually does something reasonable, because right now it's kind of just a line that doesn't really do too much. It is a separation, but it doesn't really separate as far as I would expect it to. So you can go and modify how these converted documents are formatted, but that's way out of the scope for today's video. Before I talk about tables, there's one other thing I do want to talk about, and that is doing a hard line break. So if you ever have a line that starts with a backslash and then has a new line directly after it, basically what that's going to say is start a new paragraph, because in Markdown, like with a lot of text formatting languages, having extra line breaks doesn't actually mean anything. So what I mean by this is if we get rid of this and then just add a ton of line breaks in here, what this is going to do is look exactly the same as if there was just 1 line break in here. So we look at this, it looks exactly the same as earlier. We get rid of all of these line breaks, and what you're going to see is it looks exactly the same. So that's the reason why a hard line break exists. If you need to have extra line breaks, this is how you would go about doing it. Now, I've gone and removed the image just because it was taking up too much space, but the last thing I wanted to cover is tables. So in Markdown, there's not actually a specific way to do tables, so every sort of flavor of Markdown basically comes up with its own way to do it. So what Pandoc has done has included a lot of the popular ones. I think there is 4 different ways to do tables within Pandoc Markdown, and they all have sort of different uses. So the first one we have is just called a simple table. So this will look a little something like so. What you're going to notice is it basically just generates a very basic looking table. Now this text here should have been centered, but I've actually got it set up slightly wrong. Now, another thing about Pandoc tables is that by default, with the PDF generation through a LaTeX engine, it doesn't actually put a side to the tables. You can go and manually enable that yourself, but for me, I don't really consider it much of a problem. Now, the way that this alignment works is if you have text on the right side, it will be right aligned, left side, it will be left aligned, and this center text is supposed to be centered, but I guess I didn't have it far enough to the center. So we run that again, it's still not centered, so for whatever reason, the centering isn't working. It should be working, but I'm not sure what's actually going on here. Now, the way this is formatted is kind of just to make it look a little bit nicer, but you don't actually need all of this extra formatting. So, for example, you don't need these extra spaces in here. You only ever actually need 1 space between each of the columns. You need to make sure the data actually does fit within the column, though. So if we did something like add a 1 here, yeah, okay, if it goes into the next column, as you can see, this number is considered a part of this column, and the rest of it is considered a part of this column. So just make sure that the data, whatever it is, ends up actually fitting within one column. So just make the columns as wide as they need to be, and then the data will work just fine. And then along the top here, as you can see, each column has been given a header, so this header also has to be shorter than the actual number of dashes you have. So just make sure that there's enough dashes to handle both the data and also the column header. I would recommend just making the columns wider than they need to be, just so you don't have to reformat it later down the line. Now, there's actually an extended form of this table called a multi-line table, and what this is going to do is, as the name would suggest, it's going to let you have multi-line content. So that will look a little something like so. Now, inside the table, the header is defined in basically the same way, but you can actually have a multi-line header, which is also nice. So as you can see, for the columns that are really narrow, they actually can have multi-line headers, which is kind of cool to see. And then for the text inside of here, as you can see with the paragraph to the right, this goes across multiple lines. And the way that you basically say that you're separating rows is, in a very simple way, you just physically separate the rows. So if you have a line break, this means that you're starting a new row, as opposed to the simple table where everything on the next line would be considered as the next row. And then moving on to the next type of table, this is a pipe table. So this one is actually kind of cool, and I guess it's sort of a more robust version of the simple table. So this one looks like so. As you can see, the way that you separate each column is with a line of pipes. So there's an explicit ending point for every single column, so you don't actually have to guess where a column actually ends. And then for the data, it's basically defined in the exact same way as the simple table. In this one, you can't actually have multi-line text, so it's very much similar to the simple table in that way. But the way that you actually do alignment is much, much easier than the simple table. In this one, as you can see, if you want to have it right aligned, you have a colon to the right. If you want it to be left aligned, colon to the left. If you just want to let Pandoc do whatever it wants, don't put any colons. And then if you want it centered, then put a colon on both sides. Now, the last type of table we have is a grid table. As you can see, it's defined like so. The first line starts with a plus, and then everything after that to the end of the first column has to be a dash and then another plus, and then so on and so forth for every other column. Then the first thing on the next line has to be a pipe, and then you can put the header in. Pipe, header, and then a pipe when you actually want to end the table. And then to say you're going to start defining the rows, you do a line of equal signs, and then you can start defining the rows. And each of these rows will support multi-line text, because the way that you define another row happening is you end it with this line of pluses and dashes, and then you start the process again. So if you want to have another row in here, what you're going to see is this is now a table that has 2 rows. So as you can see, we have this first row, we have this second row, and then we have this line at the bottom here. Now, if we get rid of this second row in here, you're going to see it still works perfectly fine. So this has our 1 row in here, and then the line at the bottom. Now, the only weird thing about this table is that it has this weird line break before the bottom line. I'm not sure why that happens, but it seems to always happen. Now, this is by no means every single thing you can do with Pandoc Markdown, because I didn't even touch on doing things like embedding LaTeX or embedding HTML. Those alone would take entire videos by themselves, and I didn't even cover every single thing that Pandoc Markdown can do, because that by itself would be at least an hour-long video. So feel free to come check out the full documentation if there's anything that I didn't cover today that you want to kind of try out and see if it's actually possible within Pandoc Markdown. I'm sure if it's going to be something reasonable, it's probably already going to be in here, or there's going to be a filter for it. So come check this out and see for yourself. But everything that I went over today should give you a pretty good rundown of everything you need to know to get started with Pandoc Markdown. All of the more complex stuff, you can deal with that later. But if you just want to download Pandoc and start writing in Markdown right now and generating PDF documents, this is everything that you're going to need to know on the Markdown side. So on that note, I'm going to end the video, but before I go, I want to thank my patrons. So a special thank you to Joachim, Craig, Nathan, Andrew, Montazar, Peter D, Road, Tony Donald, and Zilva. If you want to join the Patreon, there'll be a link to that down below, as well as my Amazon affiliate links where you can buy the gear in this channel, or anything I should want, and I got a small kickback for it. Also remember to go check out my podcast, that is Tech Over Tea, available on Library and YouTube, and the audio version available wherever you listen to audio podcasts. Also remember to check out this channel, also available on Library, BitTube, and BitChute. And remember to smash the like button and leave me a comment down below. And remember to subscribe and ding the little bell icon down below as well. So I think that's pretty much everything for me, and I'm out.